Hey everybody, today we're going to talk about Kel'Thuzad in World of Warcraft. If you want to learn more about any of the things that we talk about, links to those are going to be in the description. Please check those out. Early on, even before the opening of the Dark Portal, Kel'Thuzad was wealthy and prestigious, and a part of the Kirin Tor's ruling council, the Council of Six. The council kept their identities secret from all other mages, but at the time included Prince Kael'Thas, Lord Krasus, Lord Kel'Thuzad, Lord Antonidas, along with two others. Kel'Thuzad was the dreamer and researcher, specifically wanted access to Medivh's library and pushed for it through his apprentice, Khadgar. Kel'Thuzad was also interested with what happened to the Council of Tirisfal, who were responsible for the Guardians, of which Medivh was one. After the Lich King waged the War of the Spider, he raised the Nerubians' powerful leader, Anub'Arak, which made him realize he needed to bring more powerful individuals into his fold so that the Lich King could eventually break free from the Burning Legion. Kel'Thuzad, a mage and a member of Dalaran's ruling class, was a scholar of the arcane arts. Over time, his studies had evolved into necromancy. Necromancy was banned via the Kirin Tor law. He was censured repeatedly and stripped of his formal power, even pushed to being on the verge of being exiled completely from Dalaran and Lordaeron. Kel'Thuzad saw this as closed-mindedness and an antiquated view on the world. After the Horde's invasion, he saw it as a boon to study their Death Knight's powers, not forget about it. He saw it firsthand, and he knew it needed to be studied. During this time, the Kirin Tor and Antonidas were suspicious of him, and found some of the laboratories that Kel'Thuzad had been experimenting in. Jaina and Kael'Thas were also witness to this. His response to Antonidas when confronted about this was that they had little defense against the Orc Warlocks, and it would be best to learn about that magic and study it. Nonetheless, the Kirin Tor began searching all of Kel'Thuzad's properties and began confiscating dark items, and eventually led to Kel'Thuzad being banished from Dalaran. The Lich King sent out a mass mental summons to powerful individuals throughout Azeroth. Kel'Thuzad was one of the first to respond, being offered access to the deepest secrets of necromancy. Kel'Thuzad abandoned his remaining duties at Dalaran and traveled to Northrend to see this entity firsthand. He saw the ruins of Azjol Nerub, met Anub'Arak, and saw the terrors within the ziggurat of Naxxramas. He was in awe. He also realized he was in way over his head and briefly tried escaping by teleporting, but was brought back inside by Wraiths. He saw that the Lich King was preparing for war. There were training grounds and a liquid that turned people undead. The servants of the Lich King made it very clear that he would serve whether he wanted to or not. He was forced to trek long months to the Frozen Throne to meet the Lich King himself, and was told that he'd be repaid with power beyond imagining. But if Kel'Thuzad betrayed the Lich King, he would become one of the mindless ones. He tells Kel'Thuzad he can read minds, and to not plan on betraying him. In the words of the Lich King, "As my lieutenant, you will gain knowledge and magic to surpass your most ambitious dreams. But in return, living or dead, you will serve me for the rest of your days. If you betray me, I shall make you into one of my mindless ones, and you will serve me still." The Lich King reveals his plan to scour humanity from the planet, and he charged Kel'Thuzad with returning to Lordaeron and gathering loyal followers to eventually spread the plague of undeath on the populace. Slowly, Kel'Thuzad's reluctance left him, and his desire to serve grew. He began to hunger for the day he would ascend to undeath. In the words of Kel'Thuzad, "I was cast out by my comrades, exiled, forced to wander the frozen wastes. But I was not alone. Not entirely. The voice, now my only companion, guided me to my destination. Strange, nightmarish creatures awaited me at the entrance. I felt my blood run cold as Icecrown itself. Inside, I bore witness to horrific acts, demonstrations of power that could be mine for the asking. Terrified, I ran, but I did not get far. All too soon, my choice was made. Too late did I realize that such power does not come without a price. Now the world will pay a far greater toll, for I have returned. I am Kel'Thuzad. Your curiosity will be the death of you. When Kel'Thuzad returned to Lordaeron, he began preaching a new religion, where they would worship the Lich King like a god. He would win over the lower class by playing on their hatred for Lordaeron's government. He said that he could ease their pain, give them hope, and even grant them eternal life. Then he won over the rich by enticing them with even greater power, and they could use the poor they won over to secure more wealth and destroy their enemies. He only told the few that he could trust the darkness that they were embarking on, and their plan with the plague of Undeath. These followers would become known as the Cult of the Damned. The Cult of the Damned established their headquarters in the catacombs under Scholomance, which had fallen into ruin after the Second War. He taught young cultists necromancy. This was acquired from the Medivh family, who were convinced by Kel'Thuzad to donate their crypts to the Scourge. The Scourge repaid them by killing them. Here, they also conducted experiments, animated skeletons, and hacked apart corpses and pieced them back together into giant abominations. Kel'Thuzad also focused on his most important experiment, the Plague of Undeath, which he brought from Northrend to Scholomance. He worked to create a strain of the disease, with an incubation period long enough so humans would consume the infected food before any symptoms surfaced, to maximize the number of victims. He experimented primarily on rats. Occasionally, Kel'Thuzad would hear the voice of the Lich King, which would help him along. In their final preparations, Kel'Thuzad ordered a number of plague cauldrons to be put in cult-controlled areas. These cauldrons would act as plague generators to seep into farmlands and infect individuals that the infected grain missed. When the orcs escaped from their internment camps, it caused infighting among the Alliance, and it splintered. Kil'jaeden tells the Lich King that this was the perfect time to unleash the plague, as the whole point of the existence of the Lich King was to soften Azeroth for an invasion by the Burning Legion. Kel'Thuzad and the Cult of the Damned were ready. They held Andorhal, the kingdom's main distribution point for grain. They tainted the grain stored there with the Plague of Undeath. Many of the cultists were kept in the dark about what they had done. Then merchants traveled with the grain throughout Lordaeron, and civilians consumed it. First came the fatigue and mild fevers, mostly from the young and the old. Then entire families fell ill. Then villages. Healing potions and salves did not affect the disease, and even holy magic was only effective in the very early stages. Reports reached Capital City, where King Terenas Menethil II demanded more information before committing resources. Disease was not rare, and with the Horde on the loose, he did not want to commit resources to quarantine villages. Shortly after that decision was made, the plague's final stage began. Those it killed began rising from graves as mindless corpses, enslaved to the Lich King's will. An army slowly formed, one composed of the Cult of the Damned and the Undead, which became known as the Scourge. And they would begin the scourging of Lordaeron. Kel'Thuzad was 58 years old. The king could no longer ignore the plague, so he sent his own son, Prince Arthas, to investigate, while Archmage Antonidas of the Kirin Tor sent Jaina Proudmoore. Slowly, they uncovered the secret Cult of the Damned and realized what they had done. They tracked down and slew Kel'Thuzad at Andorhal, which the Lich King let happen as a part of his plan to eventually corrupt Arthas. The Lich King knew that if Kel'Thuzad was not dead, he would not focus on taking out one of his Dreadlord handlers, Mal'Ganis. Kel'Thuzad sacrificed himself because he trusted that the Lich King would resurrect him, so he could ascend into Undeath. After Kel'Thuzad's death, a shroud of decay settled over the Plaguelands, choking it and blocking out the sun. Arthas went to Stratholme, chasing down the Dreadlord Mal'Ganis, who he blamed for the plague because as Kel'Thuzad died, Kel'Thuzad lied and told Arthas that Mal'Ganis was the leader of the Scourge, not the Lich King. He succumbed to darkness by culling Stratholme of citizens who could be infected by the plague. Mal'Ganis then retreated to Northrend, where the Lich King was luring Arthas, to eventually be his vessel and champion. Once Arthas had secured Frostmourne and became a Death Knight of the Lich King, the next step was to summon Arcamon to Azeroth, which would require a large amount of power, which they could get from the Book of Medivh in Dalaran. Since Kel'Thuzad was a ruler of Dalaran in life, he could help the Scourge bypass their defenses and steal the book. Arthas, ironically being his killer, was tasked with recovering Kel'Thuzad's remains and resurrecting him. Kel'Thuzad's remains were in Andorhal. Unfortunately, that was also where the remaining paladins were based fighting off the Scourge. Arthas and his army slew the paladins there, including Gavinrod and his mentor, Uther. Kel'Thuzad's remains were recovered, and they were put into an urn that had once held King Terenas' ashes, a special urn that would effectively preserve his remains. The Lich King was able to convince his Dreadlord handlers that they needed to transform him into a Lich, so he was more powerful and could bring the Legion to Azeroth. But in reality, the Lich King planned on making him a powerful weapon. In order to do this, they needed a powerful source of arcane energy. They decided to use the Sunwell in Quel'thalas. On the way, Kel'Thuzad was able to communicate with Arthas through his remains, guiding him to the Lich King's will, but not the Burning Legions, who controlled the Lich King. The Scourge swept over Quel'thalas, and very few elves escaped. In the process, Arthas resurrected the elf Koltira as a Death Knight, and Sylvanas Windrunner as a Banshee. With the aid of Dar'khan, they broke through the elves' defenses, and Arthas submerged Kel'Thuzad's remains in the Sunwell, then wove a spell to raise him as a Lich. This raising tainted the Sunwell. The Scourge, including the newly lichified Kel'Thuzad, then marched to Dalaran to retrieve the Book of Medivh. The land the Scourge touched died, and this wound would forever be known as the Dead Scar. The High Elves that survived this attack would begin calling themselves Blood Elves, as a tribute to their fallen kingdom. Kel'Thuzad communed with Arcamon through one of the Blackrock Orcs' functional demon gates to coordinate a plan. Seeing the Scourge march on them, the Kirin Tor and Dalaran prepared for battle, evacuating civilians. Antonidas could not flee west, as was suggested by the Guardian Medivh, so he sent his apprentice, Jaina Proudmoore, to Kalimdor with a large amount of refugees to flee the Scourge. On the way, Kel'Thuzad told Arthas about the Lich King's plan to rebel against the Legion, telling him to be ready for the rebellion against these demons. When they reached Dalaran, the Scourge army did a full frontal assault. While the mages were distracted, Kel'Thuzad, Arthas, and the Dreadlord Tichondrius, and a small force of Scourge infiltrated the city, using Kel'Thuzad's knowledge of the city's defenses. They found Antonidas waiting at the Book of Medivh and slew him. Kel'Thuzad then shattered the vault and retrieved the book. In addition, Tichondrius stole the skull of Gul'dan, which was being stored here. Kel'Thuzad then used the powers of the book to weave a spell and created a rift that linked Azeroth with the Twisting Nether. Fellhounds, Infernals, and Greater Demons flowed from the rift. They were followed by the Pit Lord Manaroth and Doom Lord Kazak, then Arcamon. Arcamon immediately cast a spell to make the city fall. He then transferred control of the Scourge to the Dreadlords, seeing no further use for the Lich King. The Burning Legion then went on to attempt to control the Well of Eternity in Kalimdor, but were stopped by an alliance between the Alliance, Horde, and Night Elves, even leading to the death of Arcamon. During this time, Kel'Thuzad and Sylvanas stayed in the Plague Lands, while Arthas went to Kalimdor. Kil'jaeden didn't think all was lost. He still had the Dreadlords, the Scourge, and the Lich King. However, when Kil'jaeden reached out to the Lich King, he refused. The Scourge was his alone now. The Lich King then reached out to Arthas, Kel'Thuzad, and the rest of the Scourge to hunt down and kill the remaining Dreadlord handlers that the Burning Legion used to control him, Balnazar, Varimathras, and Deatharok, to truly be free of the Legion and the surviving humans. As they cut their way through the force of Magroth the Defender, Arthas suffered from some violent seizures, and during so, many of the Scourge, including Sylvanas, regained their free will due to the weakening of the Lich King. Kel'Thuzad and Arthas were separated in a Dreadlord attack, but both escaped. In order to take revenge on Arthas, the free-willed undead planned an ambush, tricked by Sylvanas' banshees, while Sylvanas shot Arthas with a special poisoned arrow that would deal a slow, painful death filled with agony. Arthas is saved by Kel'Thuzad from this horrible fate. When Illidan began his move on the Lich King at the Frozen Throne to destroy him, ordered by Kil'jaeden, Arthas left the Eastern Kingdoms to defend his master. Kel'Thuzad was left in charge of the Scourge in Lordaeron to continue protecting their holdings. However, free-willed undead still controlled the Undercity, and the paladins of the Argent Dawn and the Scarlet Crusade were still fighting against the undead in the Plague Lands. When Alexandros Mograine was murdered by his son, Renault, Kel'Thuzad ordered the retrieving of the body and the weapon, the Ashbringer, by the Scourge. Alexandros would then be broken and corrupted by Kel'Thuzad and turned into a Death Knight to serve the Lich King, the first and leader of the Four Horsemen, the greatest creation of Kel'Thuzad. The Four Horsemen were the most powerful warriors in the Scourge army, and they were directly linked to Kel'Thuzad, so the only way to kill them was to kill the Lich. The closest living lieutenants of Kel'Thuzad are known as the Next in Line, who are raised as shades and replaced periodically. They, and the rest of the cult, work to expand the Scourge's sphere of control. The Lich King had been watching the Horde and Alliance fight at Anub'Arak, and knew that the war effort had weakened both factions, and knew that this was his opportunity to strengthen his holdings in Eastern Kingdoms and Kalimdor. He unleashed his Nerubian necropoli all over Azeroth, unleashing Scourge on the Horde and the Alliance. The power of the Scourge was centralized in Naxxramas, floating above the Plague Lands. This is where Kel'Thuzad resided to oversee the invasion, along with his loving cat, Mr. Bigglesworth. In addition to the invasion, Kel'Thuzad was also seeking Atiesh in the Plague Lands, the Great Staff of Medivh. However, the security of this base of operations was compromised due to the many fronts the Scourge was fighting on, and the constant attacks by the Argent Dawn and the Scarlet Crusade. After the Scourge attack on Stormwind, Bolvar Fordragon recognized the threat and rallied the Alliance to assault Naxxramas, where they braved the horrors within, eventually confronting Kel'Thuzad and slaying him again. As Kel'Thuzad fell, he let the heroes know that he would return, more powerful than ever. Naxxramas and the other necropoli began drifting back to Northrend. Kel'Thuzad's phylactery would be smuggled back to the Lich King by Father Inigo Montoy, who betrayed the Argent Dawn. The heroes of Azeroth who gave the phylactery to Inigo Montoy were manipulated by some mental force, probably the Lich King, and the Lich King would use their necromantic powers to resurrect the Lich again. In an attempt to bring more Scourge into the fold, Kel'Thuzad staged an attack on Light's Hope Chapel, a place held by the Argent Dawn, where the heroes of the First and Second War were buried. In the battle, Darian Mograine ran the Ashbringer through himself to awaken his father's spirit and the spirits beneath Light's Hope Chapel. Kel'Thuzad may have lost this battle, but he claimed the body of Darian, and again, the Ashbringer as his prize, who would be risen into a Death Knight. Years later, when the Horde and Alliance were invading Northrend, when they finally reached the Dragonblight, the Scourge made their first real counterattack. Naxxramas reappeared in the skies, again commanded by the again resurrected Kel'Thuzad, mightier than ever before, and containing all of the same horrors within, including the Four Horsemen riding once again, with the exception of Alexandros Mograine, who was missing, due to Darian, his son, taking his soul out of Naxxramas when he was defeated. He directed his Scourge armies to attack the Horde and the Alliance, and his spies to sow chaos from within, with Naxxramas itself assaulting Winterguard Keep. Father Montoy was rewarded by the Lich King for smuggling Kel'Thuzad's phylactery to Northrend by being turned into a Lich himself, Thel'Zan the Dustbringer. However, by bringing Naxxramas so close to the front lines, it left it open for a strike on the fortress itself. Champions from the Horde and Alliance assaulted the fortress once again, facing its horrors. Again, Kel'Thuzad was defeated. Rumors spread that his soul was lost to the Shadowlands and could not be resurrected again. As a former member of the Kirin Tor, Kel'Thuzad is a great example of members of the Kirin Tor abusing their power. Between the Guardians, Kel'Thuzad, Kael'Thas, the Kirin Tor doesn't have a good history of their goal of staying above the wars of the factions, though it means well. This was the fact that Cael'Thas used in the aftermath of the bombing of Theramore to simmer Jaina down when she wanted to kill everybody in Orgrimmar for her not to be like her predecessors. Now, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please like and subscribe. Check me out on other social medias, on Twitch, on Twitter, on Discord, TikTok, Instagram eventually. All those links are in the description. And I'll see you guys later. Have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.